I'm early at an airport, and that means I have enough time to make a very quick YouTube video. I wasn't planning on marathoning Good Vibrations, but I did. Also, I'm super sorry if the camera's shaky. I'm literally holding it. Hello. Ooh. As per the bass music fandom wiki page, Good Vibrations is a label founded by Derek Anderson and Scott Land, who are part of the United States-based duo SLANDER, and Tyler Moreney, NGHTMRE, in 2018. The releases on the label are varied, ranging from dubstep to hybrid trap. If you watched my Heaven Sent video, this Good Vibrations video is basically the Heaven Sent video all over again, but with twice the discography size. So if you want, you can click off this video. You're not really missing too much in regards to how the label works, some of the issues that I've had with the label, and I'm also gonna keep it short because I don't want these people staring at me anymore that are in front of me. But similarly to Heaven Sent, I had thought that the Good Vibrations marathon was going to be a lot longer. I was expecting the range of 300 to 400 songs. I'm really starting to realize a trend in that I've just been completely, one could say, spoiled. That said, when compared to Heaven Sent, the density of releases over time is definitely more stacked with Good Vibrations than it was with Heaven Sent. As of the last Good Vibrations song that I listened to, that being Storyboard's Heavy Wrist, they had just reached 190 songs. However, as of scripting this video, there has been a Twirl release, if I recall correctly, that's coming out soon. Part of my main thesis in the previous video that I had mentioned was that the interesting part about Heaven Sent being a label by SLANDER was that SLANDER in no metrics was the main artist of the label. With Good Vibrations, the dynamic has shifted, however, but one could debate how much. Appearances wise, SLANDER comes first and by a long shot with 42 appearances out of the 190 releases that have come out. Everyone else trails behind, such as Shadient, NGHTMRE, and Wavedash, breaking or just barely breaking 20 appearances. That said, when you switch over to the number of tracks that they've released, you begin to see that the appearances tab is very much padded up, and that is because of the number of remix EPs that SLANDER released. In regards to the number of individual tracks, Shadient and Wavedash, pretty unsurprising, have the most. Ever since the very beginning of the label, Shadient and Wavedash were kind of pioneered as probably the label main weights, the ones that were the main faces of the label that weren't actually SLANDER or NGHTMRE. This is very prevalent by the number of releases that came out, the first artists to release a whole album that weren't SLANDER or NGHTMRE. And then even over the longer period of time, over the entire discography, Shadient has released 4 albums with SLANDER in 3, Wavedash in 2, NGHTMRE in 2, and Perry Wayne in 2. Perry Wayne's definitely an outlier in this situation, as they've only started releasing music on Good Vibrations as of the past few years. But that said, if the pace keeps up, Perry Wayne's definitely going to become a huge staple to Good Vibrations. Remixes wise, there's actually been a lot more remixes, and that's one of the most interesting things as of Good Vibrations, in that almost every single remix on the label is of a SLANDER track, which is how you get the overinflated SLANDER appearances in the whole discography. I believe it comes out to like literally 3 remix EPs, and that's of 3 individual SLANDER tracks. And then even past the remix EPs, they continue to release more remixes of songs that have been, at this point, many years old. Longest song on a label by a long shot is SLANDER and Dylan Matthews' Love Is Gone, Green Ice orchestral cover at just under 8 minutes, with a few other tracks trailing behind in the early 6-minute margins, that being Wavedash Hold Still, SLANDER Subtronic's Gravity, and SLANDER Marauda's Suffer. On the other end of the spectrum, one of the things that I think is kind of interesting is that usually on most labels, the songs that are the shortest are oftentimes the intros and the interludes. And this label doesn't really have any intros or interludes. Or they do, but it usually is almost long enough to be its own song. And at 129, you have Wavedash Left Behind. I don't exactly remember off the top of my head if that was an interlude, but if you don't count that, then the second song is GQ and Hi I'm Ghost Busting at 134. There's probably some kind of joke you could make there. 1 minute 34 busting. Definitely not very on the nose because of the vocals that are used in the song, but what do I know? The last thing worth mentioning stats-wise is just the number of featured artists on the label. And unlike Heaven Sent, where I feel like there was a lot more diversity in regards to the density of songs, there's definitely a nice array of featured vocalists, but the main ones that take the cake is fucking Sid. At least that's how I imagine it. I imagine it's not FKNSYD. But compared to all of the other featured artists that I've either featured once or twice, that being Dylan Matthew and JT Roach, fucking Sid comes in with 5 featured tracks. So good ups on them. If you guys don't remember, in the previous video, I actually shouted out their EP. It was unlike anything that I would have expected to be released on Heaven Sent. And while they might not be pushed to the same level as a Wavedash or a Shadient, I would imagine that fucking Sid is an artist that they are trying to push, and one that is pretty deserving. Enough about the stats, I'm gonna keep this part very short, but overall, what was my thoughts and would I recommend marathoning Good Vibrations? Unlike Heaven Sent, which released late 2020, Good Vibrations was started back in 2018, which does result in a lot more aged music. And while in melodic music, it might not be as noticeable that the music may be aged, the first few years of Good Vibrations was a bit of a slog to get through. I'm not gonna lie, I didn't really like any of the songs until the Shadient EP had came out. One little fun fact is that Nightmare, Shaquille O'Neal's, and Lil Jon's Bang actually has a clean version, which is kind of funny because when I listened to Bang, I didn't realize it was explicit to begin with, but the more you know. And while Good Vibrations is probably more advertised as like the dubstep and hybrid trap label, I would definitely lean into that the hybrid trap is definitely the more interesting of the music. That said, similarly to Heaven Sent, I don't think it was the main genre that they were trying to push, at least to a certain degree. Like when they were starting off, for sure, dubstep, hybrid trap, totally. And I think one of the most interesting things is how Shadient and Wavedash started off as this dubstep hybrid trap alias, and then slowly kind of bled into other genres and areas of music. When you compare the music that they had released at the very beginning to some of their most recent EPs on the label, you wouldn't even recognize that they are the same artist. And to some people who might not believe me, this was actually my first time listening to Wavedash and Shadient's music. Wavedash being a minor exception, they had one song on Bitbird, which I really enjoyed. So I wasn't really expecting the music that they had released back then, and I was unfortunately not a big fan of it. That wasn't until later on when they released their albums. But would I recommend marathoning Good Vibrations? I don't really know if I would, and it's because of a factor of a few reasons. Number one, it has the exact same issues with Heaven Sent in regards to their very, very slow rollout of the discography. Heaven Sent at least had a link tree which had every single release, barring a few tracks that were missing. And in the previous video, I had mentioned that they didn't have a Spotify playlist, and that was an incorrect point on my part. They actually did. But Good Vibrations, they have a Spotify playlist, but it's outdated by many years and has releases that aren't even on Good Vibrations. They are under Insomniac Records though, so I would imagine maybe there's some cross-licensing, but they don't have a link tree. And just like the issues with Heaven Sent, their SoundCloud reposts are extremely delayed. So unfortunately, I wouldn't really recommend marathoning Good Vibrations unless you wanted to put in the work to compile all the releases and listen to them like I did. That said, if you wanted to start listening to Good Vibrations, I would imagine that there's some good music that's coming out pretty soon, and the quality has definitely ramped up ever since the very beginning of the label. If you did want to listen to some of the backlog though, I would definitely recommend probably listening and checking out some of their main albums that they had released, such as I had mentioned the Shadient Have You No Burden LP, the Wavedash World Famous Tour, and then probably some of the EPs such as Cyclops Data Sequence, Juki's Dark Matter, Saka's Anti-Hero, and FrostTop's Reform EPs. But if you don't feel like marathoning the discography or don't feel like checking out their albums, as always, I've got that SoundCloud playlist, go check it out. My favorite songs from my marathon will be in that playlist, and I will be regularly updated. I know it's a little bit ironic, the last video I said it was going to be a bit shorter, and this one is actually going to be a lot shorter. That said, if you haven't watched the Heaven Sent video, I think a lot of the context might be missing, so if you haven't watched it, definitely recommend you check out that one. Otherwise, feel free to just X off now. I'm gonna be boarding my flight soon, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Comment down below your favorite color of wood, and I'll see you guys in the next video. See ya!